Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the DataON Virtual Academy. It's been a while since we had this webinar. We had a lot of virtual meetup recently, and it's been great to see all our existing customer and new customer coming on and engage with us and learn more about DataON and our partners, especially the solution we've been designing with Microsoft. Very excited today. A lot of new things happening in the last month or so. So today, we're going to have a webinar, and the title of our webinar is really looking at the stretch cluster feature with Azure Stack HCI. This is a really incredible feature, a new technology that Microsoft will be implementing in the new Azure Stack HCI OS that they announced at Inspire about 3 weeks ago. And we have the owner, the PM, John Marlin, who owns Stretch Cluster here to share his thoughts and kind of really share some insights into what Stretch Cluster is about with Azure Stack HCI. We have a great speaker list today. We have John Marlin from Microsoft. We have Marcelo, who I know for a long time from Intel, who will share his thoughts on how having an infrastructure technology that supports Azure Stack HCI and really leveraging stretch clusters is important, and talking about the technology aspect of it. And we have Jason, who's our sales engineer, who will share with you his real-world experience deploying a stretch cluster in your lab today, and some of his learning and thought process that he went through. So real-life deployment experience and takeaway from what he has learned. So it'll be a really good webinar today. Just some housekeeping item. Please be muted while we have the webinar. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. We have the chat feature, and if you, towards the end, if we have some times, we'll open up for Q&As. So if you have any questions on the Q&As, feel free to let us know, and we'll try to answer the question. If not, just email us. John's always on Twitter, so tweet John and Marcelo and myself, and we'll make sure we respond to any of your questions. So like many of the webinars, I really want to set it up. My name is Howard. I'm the VP here at DataON. But I really want to set up the concept of hybrid cloud because at the end of the day, whether or not you're an existing customer or new customer, it's really a journey that DataON and our partner, Microsoft and Intel, want to take you on to make sure that you have an option as you look at modernize your data center. And we believe the journey with Azure is the right journey to go. As a kind of preamble, right? The concept of hybrid cloud and HCI it's been around, but the reality is it's not a simple hardware refresh. It's not as simple of putting out Azure Stack HCI. It's really understanding what are the key ingredients of this journey you need to consider as an IT decision maker. And those decisions really span across your entire infrastructure. To start off with, ability to manage legacy apps, and ability to integrate the new infrastructure into your existing infrastructure, it is very important. There's a lot of legacy apps that you have to continue to manage, and how does that work in a new hybrid cloud environment? To go through that thinking process evaluation to us is very critical because we have done many migration for our customer, and legacy app migration and compatibility has always been a challenge for many of our customers. Second is really defining your workload and apps, right? What is your app strategy? Which of the workload application should I move it to the cloud? Which of them can I make it and so it's continue to stay on premises? And it's a customer decision. It's a business decision. Because maybe some customer says for web services, I want to put on the cloud. Maybe for some security reason for SQL, I want to keep it on premise. But having that strategy in place is critical because how those talk to each other? How are the on-premise and the cloud application able to integrate? That's the concept of hybrid cloud. And making sure you have that concept in place is very important in your decision process. As you go through the journey, you need to consolidate and modernize your data center and making sure that it's secure. Security is the almost important for any of the enterprise today, making sure your infrastructure is secure. So as you consolidate with this technology, making sure that you have the security in mind, looking at all the challenges all the customer face today. clearly, container is a very popular direction that a lot of our customers are looking at in addition to virtualization. And how does containerization fit into your organization and your future roadmap? Lastly is really having considered all that, how do you deliver the concept of hypercloud anywhere, right? Whether or not it's at the edge, whether or not it's at your data center, whether or not it's in a smaller environment. These are decisions you have to make going through. Because today's our focus always been on the concept of hyper-converged infrastructure and Azure Stack HCI, we want to say is really the technology itself is really been deployed in many places. It is a decision that many IT leaders are looking at, because if you look at over 90% of IT decision makers are deploying hybrid cloud in one form or the other. The market for HCI is growing. It's over a $10 billion market. And you can see that as you look at the trends, over 50% of IT infrastructure today are deployed at the edge, and HCI is one of the technology they use as we continue to go down this modernization of our data center. As you look through your hybrid cloud strategy, I think it's very important to see which technology and which vendor really deploy or offer an integrated solution that's seamless. Microsoft Ignite last year and also Inspired this year continue to highlight the concept of Azure Arc. Azure Arc is a really breakthrough technology in which essentially Microsoft says, hey, with this layer of managed services for hybrid cloud, you're not just managing Azure. You have the ability on the cloud side to look at AWS, to look at Google as a service. You're not tied into one vendor. We allow you to use this layer to really manage multi-cloud environment. That's a really great direction that allows you to not have a single public cloud lockdown, right? So the concept of Azure Arc hybrid services is a really great direction that Microsoft continue to promote to make sure you have options as you look at the hybrid cloud solution. But as you go down to the on-premise direction, you'll see that there are many offerings in the Azure Stack HCI solution, whether or not it's at the edge, robo, or legacy infrastructure. But more importantly, which John will really go into, is the fact that Microsoft is seeing a tremendous growth in this category. That's why at Inspire, they announced that Azure Stack HCI OS will be a separate product from the current feature or program in Windows Server 19. And I'm sure John will go through that a little bit more. But under all that, understanding data governance, security is also a critical piece where many of our customers are looking to vendor like DataON and our partners to look at backup, look at DR as a service or as an infrastructure to make sure that their complete modernization and data center remediation is happening. So we want to make sure we address all these topics as we discuss with our customer. Today, with Windows Server 19, you'll see that Azure Stack HCI is comprised of a validated hardware from vendors like DataON and many others. You have a complete visibility into Hyper-V, SDS, software-defined networking. You will manage everything to the Windows Admin Center console, and DataON has a solution called Must, our software, to add more feature capability to that in connected hybrid cloud services. Combined, this whole thing will be the Azure Stack HCI. But with the new product, the Windows Server 19 is now replaced by the new Azure Stack HCI OS. These are the workloads that we believe are the right workload, and many of our customers running across this HCI stack, whether or not it's branch offices, whether or not it's Scala storage and SQL. Really depending on the customer, you could really want multiple different type of workload within the same infrastructure environment. But more importantly, with the new Azure Stack HCI, you could really deliver the solution as a service. Now it's a new subscription model, right, where you could really charge by core counts on an annual basis. You have the ability to scale up or scale down with a 2-node and be affordable. And more importantly, as this technology continues to advance, Microsoft is making a concerted effort with partners like DataON to make the experience more integrated. And what that means is all the OS is pre-installed, all the firmware driver update will be updated seamlessly in a cluster aware update feature. You have continued validation testing from DataON and our partners, and more importantly, support, right? You have a single point of support that will bridge between Microsoft with a dedicated support team and DataON just for these integrated systems. These are directions that our customers are asking, and DataON will continue to work with our partner Microsoft to deliver. And we're so excited about this new product, and we'll continue to share our thoughts with you as GAs. Lastly, the trends continue. We have so many customers that have made the Microsoft choice, continue to embrace the concept of hybrid cloud and Azure Stack HCI across the verticals, whether or not it's nonprofit, education, cloud, MSP, hospitals, medical. You can see this adoption of Microsoft really taking off, and we're excited to work with you guys all to continue to modernize your data center. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce John Marlin from Microsoft, who will take you guys through the new Azure Stack HCI and Stretch Cluster. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Howard. Good afternoon, good morning to everybody. Good evening to those overseas if you're on. So I wanted to talk about stretch clustering and a little bit about what Azure Stack HCI or HCI in general brings from a hybrid standpoint. I want to talk about HCI and kind of give you a little bit of background about what it is we're doing behind the scenes when things are getting created. You know, there's a lot of things that, you know, you can see, but you don't exactly know what's going on in the background. I want to show you what it is that we're doing in that background, because one of the things, one of the goals we had for Azure Stack HCI is ease of use and simplicity. Configurations, especially from a stretch standpoint, you know, between multiple sites, getting everything configured from a OS perspective, from a cluster perspective, can get a little confusing. So I wanted to make sure that I showed exactly what it is and how we are making it much easier. So the first thing is Azure Stack HCI version 20H2. That's the name of it. And we will be going through Azure and utilizing Azure in a hybrid scenario. Hybrid is really big in the community. Everybody is moving towards hybrid. There are some that will stay on-prem only. There are some that will stay in the cloud only, but a majority of the customers that we've talked with, they want hybrid. They want to go hybrid. And we believe that we've brought this together with Azure Stack HCI. So, as I mentioned, customers want hybrid. They want to be able to operate stuff in remote locations. They want to improve the agility of things. They want to maintain tight integration. You know, a lot of things that you can't do from in the cloud only or on premises only. 69% of the people are wanting that. They have that strategy. They want to get that strategy. So we really want to focus on hybrid with this and what we're doing. So, quick update. Azure Stack does have its own portfolio. We've got Azure Stack HCI, we've got Azure Stack Edge, and we've got Azure Stack Hub. Now, these are three different parts of our portfolio. Azure Stack Edge is for those edge compute solutions. You know, the small 2 nodes. I don't want to be able to do, you know, configure it. It's offered as an appliance from Microsoft. You've got Azure Stack Hub, which is on premises. In essence, it's bringing Azure on premises for you. So it has a lot of what Azure can do, but only on premises. Those are offered through a few partners. There's only like 5, I believe, solutions that you can get. This is a turnkey operation. So Microsoft and the vendor will set it all up for you. There's not much changes that you can make to it, so it's all configured for you. And then you've got Azure Stack Azure Stack HCI, and what we're going to talk about here. We've got 20 plus partners that offer solutions, including DataON. There's over 200 different configurations of those solutions and the hardware that you can have. So this is you. You control it. You can set it up. You can get the vendor to set it up for you if you like, but you control it all. So, as Howard mentioned, because of a lot of the conversations we had with customers and with hybrid, Azure Stack HCI is now its own product line. It does split off from Windows Server. But we will have existing roadmaps for each of them. Windows Server is not going away. The trick about Azure Stack HCI is it's focused on being the best virtualization host, running on bare metal, versus Windows Server, bare metal, or as a guest. So there's two different ways we're going. But Azure Stack HCI, bare metal, is what our focus is. It is our future of Hyper-V virtualization, so it will still have software-defined storage, software-defined networking. It'll have the latest virtualization software. We really want it to be focused on virtual machines. Windows Server has all the other options: DNS, Active Directory, DHCP, all your other infrastructure roles. It will still include storage spaces direct. It will still include Hyper-V. Will still include failover clustering. We're not removing any of that stuff. For Azure Stack HCI, we're focused, like I said, in virtual machines. Run your apps inside of Windows. Run it in Linux. Install Kubernetes if you want as virtual machine. Whatever you want to do. Versus Windows Server, which is you can run them in virtual machines or you can run them on Windows Server itself, like SQL Server. Key point I mentioned, Azure Stack HCI on your hardware. That's where we're going to be supporting everything, on hardware. Versus Windows Server, it can run anywhere. You want to run it in VMware. You want to run it in AWS. You want to run it in Azure. You want to run it bare metal. Totally fine. Two different operating systems is what we're on. Azure Stack HCI is more purpose-built. It is a purpose-built host operating system for the host for virtual machines. It does have the latest hypervisor built in. It is optimized for virtualization. We've done a lot of work for this. You'll also notice inside of Azure Stack HCI, we've removed a lot of the roles, such as Active Directory, DNS, printing, fax. It's not needed for Azure Stack HCI, so we've removed it. It's also more of a minimal user interface. So it's a core operating system. There is no GUI for it. We really want you to run, either PowerShell or, we've done a whole lot of work with Windows Admin Center. Windows Admin Center, we've done a lot of work over the last 6 months of getting everything we can into Windows Admin Center, and which just released last month, I believe, middle of last month. So you see a lot of benefits from Azure Stack HCI and Windows Admin Center. As you can see here, we've also renamed everything. We've got the Azure logo when you start up for the first time. When you're installing it, it shows Azure Stack HCI. It doesn't show Windows Server. Totally separate operating system. For those who remember sconfig, that is now the default shell that comes up. then you can switch out to command line or PowerShell if you want to run things. But we've really increased what sconfig can do. So, I mentioned Windows Server. I've heard a lot of rumors, and there's been a lot of assumptions, and they're bad. It all revolves around, what are we removing from Windows Server? And the answer is nothing. Windows Server is still going to have everything that it still has. It is still going to be updated. It's still going to have new features added to it. It's just we've focused a lot of our HCI capabilities into Azure Stack HCI. Windows Server will still have HCI capabilities as well, but it won't be focused like Azure Stack HCI is. So just to quell the rumors, we're not removing anything from Windows Server. We're not getting rid of Windows Server. Now, what we came to talk about, disaster recovery. There's three things you generally need to have a plan for. Be prepared. Have some sort of a plan that doesn't involve human interaction. And that would involve automatic. If a disaster hits, I want my automatic failovers. I want things to come up. I don't want to have to rely on somebody who will have to go in or have to stop what they're doing to run all this stuff. Depending on what the disaster is, that person may be more worried about his family. He may leave and not run whatever scripts or set off whatever it is. It's just human nature. So we don't want to have to rely on that. We want things to be automatic, not automated. Two different things. So with that, we created disaster recovery natively with stretched clustering. We're going to be able to span Azure Stack HCI to multiple rooms, multiple buildings, or even multiple cities. We'll use the built-in storage replica for synchronous or asynchronous storage replication. It does offer encryption, and it does, keeping with what failover clustering does, site local resiliency. We will keep things on the same site. Unless that site goes down, then we will move it over to the other site. So, I mentioned what is it that we're doing in the background. So the first thing is creating the cluster itself. I've got my two sites here, Seattle and Redmond. I've got 4 nodes that I want to split between the two. 2 nodes in Seattle, 2 nodes in Redmond. Now, I've also configured within Active Directory sites. I have a site for Seattle. I have a site with Redmond. What we're going to do when you create a cluster is we're going to go out and look in Active Directory. Do you have sites configured? If you do, we will automatically create those sites for you and put the nodes in the proper sites. If you don't have sites configured, and we'll detect based off of your IP address schemes. Is there a group of nodes that have one scheme, a different set of nodes that have a different scheme? That's sites. Let's create the sites based off those IP schemes. If you don't have either one, that's fine. We still have the capability of you creating things manually. So here, I've done that. The next thing, enabling storage spaces direct. We put a lot of stuff in, a lot of work into this. So when you enable cluster S2D, we're now going to create a pool per site. So we're going to have one pool for Seattle. We're going to have one pool for Redmond, for the individual sites. We're going to name them based off of the site name, pool for site Seattle, pool for site Redmond, and with cluster performance history, we're going to automatically set up storage replication for it. So you don't have to do anything. It's all done for you. Creating drives. That's the next thing we have to do. Creating drives in, say, 2019, failover clusters, not S2D, but just normal clusters. You've got to be able to create drives at both sites. They have to be the same size. You have to create log drives for the replication. So we wanted to make that process a lot easier. And we did that with Windows Admin Center. So once you go into Windows Admin Center and you connect to the cluster, once you go to volumes, you can click Create. From there, you start getting options. I want to replicate a volume between sites. I'll select. Which direction do I want to go? Seattle to Redmond or Redmond to Seattle? And what's my replication mode? I want to choose asynchronous. If I go down a bit, what's the name of my data volume that I want to replicate? Seattle VM disk is what I'll call it. What's my resiliency? What's the storage media that I want on it? Storage media will be auto-detected for you. So if you're HDD or SDD or a combination of both, if you're all flash, we're going to detect this all for you. At that point, what size do you want? We will verify the size that you select on both site pools to ensure that it is capable of doing it. We're not going to allow you to create anything. If it doesn't have the space for it, it's not going to create it for you. So we want to take some of that confusion out. You know, it allows you to be able to switch between the two. If I want mirror accelerated parity, if I've got 4 nodes per site. If I want two-way mirror, this is how much it's going to take. If I want three-way mirror, this is how much it's going to take. And you simply hit Create. What that's going to do is it's going to build that data disk. It's also going to create all your replicated disks for you based off that same name. So I've got my Seattle VM disk log for the Seattle site. I've got the replicated logs for the Redmond site. If I look at it in PowerShell, you can see it's created all my disks for me. So all you're doing is basically specifying one drive, and it creates 4 for you based off of that. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to set up Storage Replica for you automatically. You don't have to do that. So if you're counting at home, I create the cluster. It creates the sites for you automatically. Once I enable cluster storage spaces direct, we create multiple pools. We replicate the performance history. And inside of Windows Admin Center, create one data volume. Which direction, async or sync, what resiliency and size. 3 steps. Now, how much easier is that? That's what we're doing in the background, behind the scenes, to make it a lot easier for you, so you don't have to configure it. Now, from a site failure, automatic failovers. I've got my site, Seattle. It's running VM. Everything is replicating to Redmond. My Seattle site goes down. What we're going to do is we're going to repurpose the replicated drives in Redmond as my data drives to be utilized for Windows and the virtual machines. We're going to automatically move the VMs over. We're going to start up all the VMs so that you can get back into production automatically. We're also, because of the log file, we're going to keep track of everything that's changed. Because once Seattle comes back up, what we're going to do is we're not going to move everything back because Seattle has old stale data. Doesn't have anything updated. So what we're going to do, repurpose those drives, bring them up. We're going to start the replication going the opposite direction now so that it can get synchronized with everything, all the new changes. At that point, once everything is done, and by the way, we will not allow you to move everything back until we finish the replication. So we're going to ensure that you don't lose any kind of data. You can move it back at any time, or you can leave it as you want. Doesn't matter. We can go both ways. If you want virtual machines and drives at both sites, that's fine. All of our storage replica is on a per volume basis. Now, we mentioned some of the Azure integration for the hybrid capabilities. Inside of Azure Stack HCI, once you register with Azure, Azure Stack HCI does have a lot of the agents built in. There's nothing you have to install. They're already there. So you can quickly plug in, utilize Azure Resource Monitor. You get visibility within the Azure portal for all of your hybrid management. You can run performance monitoring from it. You can apply virtual machines to it. From Azure, apply the templates and install them, add them to your Azure Stack HCI on premises. A lot of stuff that we've worked on for this. So what it'll look like is once you log into the portal, once your Azure Stack HCI is registered with Azure, you will see Azure Stack HCI is now a service within Azure. It will list out all of your Azure Stack HCIs that have been managed, that have been added and registered, so that you can now manage individually each of these different clusters. So here, I see I've gone into the Contoso HCI. I can manage its health. I can see its health, which is coming soon. I can see that I've got connectivity to it, updates to it. That's coming as well pretty soon. All that stuff will be there before release. So you can really start managing from either on-premises with Windows Admin Center or from with the Azure portal itself, whichever you're more comfortable with. We've done a lot of work to make this easier. There's a lot of work that was done in Windows Admin Center to get that same look and feel. If you've seen it, the most recent one, it's the same look and feel of what Azure portal is. So there's a lot of commonalities between the two. And lastly, Azure Stack HCI is in preview now. Simply go azure.com/HCI. Log in with your Azure and download it and install it. During the preview, there is no charge for this. So you won't see anything coming up on your bills with Azure Stack HCI. It is also all billed through Azure. As Howard mentioned earlier, it's a subscription that you have. You use your current existing Azure subscription and you're billed through Azure for it all. If you're an existing customer, if you've got support for it, you've got Azure support that you can go to. You can go to DataON, as Howard mentioned. It's all there. It's all about ease of use. If you want to read up more about it, aka.ms/HCI-docs. We've got plenty of docs out there. What is it? How can you deploy it? How can you manage it? And much more. So I highly encourage everybody. We're excited about it. Let us know about it. Go download it. Go install it. Go test it. We're really looking for your feedback. We will release later this year. So get in on it early. And with that, I will hand off to Marcelo.
Hey, John. Thanks for congrats for the great presentation. Really excited about this journey, as Howard and you were saying, related to hybrid cloud and Azure Stack HCI. I'd like to thank DataON and Microsoft for being here, and I hope you all that are watching us are healthy and safe, and keep that way. I'll let you start piggybacking on something that both Howard and John said, that Azure Stack HCI runs on your hardware. And that's why I'm here to talk a little bit from a perspective, from the hardware perspective in the integration with the software capabilities to make sure you're making the best choice moving forward. This is just a Intel data-centric portfolio, and we have ingredients for move data faster, store more, and process everything. And that goes from our, Columbia-ville NIC, that's the internal name, the Intel Ethernet 800 that we have 100 gig RDMA that supports both IWARP and RoCE v2. We have Intel Optane persistent memory that can speed up your cache share or can be used as a second level memory, so it can pack up more VMs on your nodes. We have the Intel Optane SSDs that can also be used as cache share. We have our Xeon lineup, and it's coming more, obviously. Next generation, we have multiple improvements. We have the FPGA lineup, and then we have smaller footprint Xeons for edge-specific work. On top of that, Intel has become front and center with security from the hardware perspective, building the root of trust and improving on a daily basis. Every generation, we thank the community for all the feedback and the things that they found, and we implemented fixes, and also we build a more robust product for you. We have a lot of deployments, a lot of developers that benefit from our platforms, so they can optimize their applications to run best on Intel. And we have one API, that's the unified language and libraries, that it can run seamlessly across any XPU, CPU, FPGA, GPU, if you will. So why Intel is the foundation for Azure Stack HCI? We do have multiple groups at Intel that work with hybrid cloud. I'm one of the group, and I'm representing here the effort of many of my colleagues here. We do have end-to-end solution for easy path for migration, meaning that we do build reference architectures looking at the software stack, the most common deployed applications that enterprise customers would use, and the ones that would make sense for hybrid cloud on-premises. And we have a team also that concentrates on public Azure cloud. We do a lot of performance and security analysis. We have a lot of new instructions that we, every generation, we either improve them or we create new instructions to expedite the security of things. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about this. So the way we look at this from a hardware perspective and a software integration is to have a very good customer experience with fast deployments and optimized solutions. So end customers wouldn't have to be concerned about, is this component or ingredient a good fit for my hybrid cloud solution? That's why we have partners such as DataON that they do, the final tuning for their own solution based on certified ingredients that they do the end-to-end validation as well. And also on the fast deployment, we have, and not everybody know, but we do have a lot of software tools and for optimization on our instruction sets. And I'll talk a little bit more about one of these tools that's called vTune that I use constantly and it's part of our top-down microarchitecture analysis. And Intel has been in this long journey as a trusted brand and being part of multiple standards forums to define the next gen of NVMe, NVMe over Fabric, Redfish, Swordfish, many standards as Intel participates. And we contribute and make sure we have interoperability between vendors. Moving forward, so some key points on defining on why Intel matters here in this key technology. People typically abstract the hardware, which is fair enough to a certain extent, but some key technologies that are present in our hardware they do actually matter and matter a lot. And I'll go over them with you. Some key aspects of the structured cluster disaster recovery and business continuity. I'm not going to go over all the details, but some of the key things that I have to keep in mind is the SLA, the service level agreement, the RTO, the recovery time objective, and the RPO, recovery point of objective. And that translates directly to the three things that I was talking before of move faster, store more and faster, and process everything, right? In order to keep up your service level agreement, you have to be up with availability, with a certain expectation for response time. You have to have the data moving and where it has to be and protected and safe. Same thing with recovery time objective and recovery point of objective. So when it comes to Intel, why should you care? And I'm asking for permission from John to show his picture here with some more ingredients here, put in some Intel components here so we can make the reference and correlation. So the first one, obviously, you should have your 2 to 16 node cluster on each side. And if you configure the structured cluster, as John was explaining before, the better infrastructure you have on both sides, it will matter when you are with your automatic failover, with your storage replication. And what I mean by that is you have to have a fast processing capability on both ends. You have to have fast storage and network on both ends, because some of the features that you use will demand more processing and storage and networking capability. So if you're, on both sides, if you use BitLocker is based on the AES, Advanced Encryption Standard XCS. And how does that correlate to Intel? So all the software constructs that Microsoft has put in place for BitLocker, we do optimize for Intel integrated instructions such as AES and I. And every new generation we iterate, we hear customer feedback, we look at and do the analysis on the bottlenecks, potential bottlenecks, and what can we improve as part of our next gen. We improve the cycles, the instructions per cycle, we improve the throughput, we improve the latency. So you can have data at rest safely and with high performance. And if you look at some of the key points here of the structured cluster, if you're using synchronous way, the RTT, the round trip time, it's 5 milliseconds. Obviously, you have to have fast data to transport here in a fast path. Either a fiber or a good service provider that could happen here. If you're talking about automatic VM failover, some of just a pretty high level operations that happen in the underlying layers of the failover is man copy operations and compression. And what does Intel have to do with it, right? We care about the man copy operations that is part of the process, so we can expedite that with more instructions and better instructions, so this automatic failover will be faster and more reliable to you. Going back to the SLA RTO point here in RPO. If you look at the storage failover, storage replication, what we see is in a similar fashion. We see, my fault here. We see in a similar fashion, we have encryption. It's optional, but you can, if you use it, SMB encryption does use AES GCM. And again, goes back to Intel instructions that we optimize for a fast encryption so you can use encryption seamlessly. On the some checkpoints here that you need to think through when you're planning or implementing your structured cluster scenarios. So first is to make sure you have a well-designed Azure Stack HCI cluster solution. That's why I had to rely on partners such as DataON, that they go through the process, they do have their first-hand experience, that it will be a reliable partner to implement this moving forward. Some of the key strategies, as John was saying, like planning and testing are key to success. And I've implemented implemented Stretch Cluster before, 4 or 5 times. I'm a bit paranoid about some things. We hired a service provider, and I asked him for the path of the fiber that he was connecting both sites. And then I look at the SATA report to see how many accidents would they have there because they were going aerial. So to make sure no one would hit the edit or I'll be down. So we have 2 paths, different routes, different paths. Like power outage is key as well. And some key points here to stay compliant. If you have any compliant with the DRPR, the HIPAA, the PCIe, the payment card industry, any compliant that you have to make sure you are compliant with that. So disaster recovery is not about just saving the data, but make sure the business is up and running the same way it should be in the first place. Make sure you have a backup plan. And the key thing about that John was mentioning was having Azure as the single management dashboard for multiple clusters. That's a very good feature for you, and that's what makes us feel very excited and bullish about Azure Stack HCI moving forward. Some key things that we do at Intel, we obviously, based on my previous slide, we look at how the software behaves, how the workloads behave, and what can we do to optimize them. And if you're in the same path, if you're new to this, just look at some performance counters that Microsoft has natively for you. The Storage Replica partition IO statistics, Storage Replica statistics, obviously CPU, memory, network, disk IO, etc. And then at Intel, we do have a top-down microarchitecture analysis that we go and look from a solution level, what are the key pain points, and tying back to the key metrics and KPIs that we have to measure from an end customer perspective to see what we can do. And we use vTune, one of the software that I've mentioned before, that it has a hotspot identifications that we can go and look at what is missing, what can be done differently, or is this a fine tune, is this a VM adjustment, is this a hypervisor, is this a VM queue setup. This all be taken care of with your partner of choice and with all the goodness that Microsoft is putting on the Windows Admin Center, at least the cluster setup and initial configuration. So we look at this from that perspective, and we are, the way we work with key partners such as Microsoft and DataON is to make sure there's a seamless transition that have the best customer experience running on Intel and Microsoft solutions. And I'll let the numbers speak by itself. We have some numbers here. I'll not go over them all, but if you do some improvements on every single layer from the system memory, on the cache share memory, on the obviously CPU transition to next gen or newer generations, you can have IOPS, you have lower latency, you can have more VMs if you have more memory that using Intel Optane. And I live here 2 use cases from DataON Storage Review did, a third-party did, praising their high quality and their, the great solutions that they have with Intel components and ingredients. For that, that's all that I have for today. I'd like to go back to Howard.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. Thank you so much, John, for sharing the technology and really sharing the concept of Azure Stack HCI Stretch Cluster and how hardware does matter. Marcelo, DataON is a 100% Intel shop. Our server are manufactured by Intel. All the components, all the storages. So we're excited to continue this partnership. So I'd like to introduce Jason, who's our engineer, actually been working in the background all the time. And let him share some of the testing he's been doing. He did some initial setup of a stretch cluster here in our lab, and I asked him to come up and kind of share some of the data. And go ahead, Jason.
Okay. Thanks, Howard, for the introduction. As Howard mentioned, my name's Jason Cheung. I'm the technical sales engineer at DataON. And I've had the chance to follow Microsoft's wave of the software-defined storage from storage spaces to storage spaces direct. And finally, now I'm followed that wave all the way to Stretch Cluster on the new Azure Stack HCI OS. So I'll kind of bring everything that John and Marcelo shared together and sharing my firsthand experience deploying the Stretch Cluster. Okay, so first I'll start off with the foundation of what I deployed this stretch cluster with. As you can see on the slide here, I had 4 DataON S2D 5212 nodes, each with 512 gigs of RAM, each node having Intel's P4610 NVMe drives for cache, and each node with 7 spinning disks for the capacity. As you can see on the diagram to the right, the green connection and the blue connection, I had these nodes directly connected through their 25 gigabit Mellanox RDMA adapters, 2 per site, which I simulated for this stretch cluster. So having 2 nodes directly attached at each site, I was essentially implementing DataON's Kepler 2 node or K2N 212 solution. So this type of hybrid configuration is a fairly standard solution we deploy for many of our customers to run their workload. Okay, for testing process and procedures, so with the new feature, I come from Storage Spaces Direct, so I'm fairly familiar with the S2D and clustering. So with this new feature of stretch cluster, it was important for me to understand the capabilities as well as how the feature was meant to function. I simulated 2 sites by having one 2-node directly attached setup on a 10.3.7 subnet in one rack, and the other 2-node directly attached setup on a 10.4.7 subnet in a completely different rack. So like I said, coming from S2D, I'm very familiar with how to prep the nodes prior to creating the cluster. And that pretty much means configure the networking, join the nodes to the domain, ensure that the drives on each node are clean and in a can-pull state, and also install the Windows features that are required, like Windows failover clustering, Hyper-V, files and services, and importantly for this deployment was Storage Replica. That's more of a more required feature for deploying a stretch cluster. All right. And for having stretch volumes. So the key, everything up to this point of creating the 4 nodes in the cluster, I was very familiar with, and the main difference was creating, after the cluster was created, the main difference I saw right away is the new cluster fault domain commands that need to be ran. Well, as John mentioned, they have auto sites. I actually played around and put sites in our testing AD and saw that the nodes followed. It would auto detect that certain nodes had a certain IP scheme, and they kind of showed up at their correct sites. But trying to stay aligned with their documentation, I made sites, site 1 and site 2, to follow the documentation, which was new for me because that commandlet itself, the new cluster fault domain, was something that I haven't used or haven't used for traditional S2D. So once the main difference I saw was creating the sites and then, of course, assigning those nodes to those sites. And after you do that, you can basically continue on as if it is a S2D cluster, and running the enable cluster storage spaces direct commandlet will kick off the creation of S2D. So right off the bat, I noticed that there were 2 pools. So I see that John says that this is, by design. I'm so used to seeing one giant pool, but the pools were named respectively to their sites, and in their pool, I was able to see that they consisted of the 4 NVMe drives and 14 hard drives. So basically the 2 nodes drive configuration per site. And the second obvious thing that I noticed was the 4 disk volumes under the disk dropdown in failover cluster manager. I was just using Microsoft Management Control and then to connect to this cluster just to have a better visual feel, since these were core operating systems loaded onto these hosts. And just like Windows Server 2019, you'd expect to see the performance history volume, which I did. But as John said, they also made the replicated volume at the second site as well as their respective logs. So that was new to me as well, and something I noticed right off the bat. With the cluster built, I was able to create stretch volumes using Windows Admin Center, and the volume creation was very clear to show options of choosing async or synchronous replication and which direction I wanted, for either from site 1 to site 2 or from 2 to 1. So once the volumes are created, I was able to see real-time replication, and by that I tested simply copying some data to the data volume on one site, and I checked the volume owned by the destination site and instantly saw the same exact data. I actually copied some ISO files to the destination or site 2's volume and saw the same ISO files, which kind of indicated that bidirectional replication that John was mentioning. You can have it at this site or the other site. And lastly, for seeing how the feature functioned, I created some test VMs that were clustered roles in my stretch cluster. And I shut down both servers at site 1 to simulate the entire rack or site failure. And I again saw real time the VM ownership changed to one of site 2's node, and the volume changed the labeling under the assigned to column from SR group to now read clustered share volume, indicating that there was a site failover. So the VMs came up automatically as expected, so showing that there was a successful site failover. And from this, my biggest takeaways, I would say that each site having their own storage pool. If you come from S2D, by having each site with their own pool, in this case where I had 2 nodes directly attached, I was able to utilize either the two-way or nested resiliency following the conventional two-node cluster rule or pool rule. And also, if you're familiar with S2D and failover clustering, the configuration is very, very similar. So even though they do so much work in the background, and with Windows Admin Center making all that work in the background not seems as so much work, it really makes it easy for the user to deploy the stretch cluster and experience creating like those stretch volumes without having to do PowerShell. So with everything that John mentioned is happening in the background, I felt that the experience and the ease of deploying this stretch cluster was a good experience. So with that, I'll send it back to Howard to kind of wrap this up.
That was awesome, Jason. It was awesome because it gives a realistic experience of a system admin deploying a technology from Microsoft, which you experienced with S2D, and also using the infrastructure clearly that we've been using for our partner Intel to show that this feature is real. John, we believe you. We always believe you, but this time we really believe you because we can see it, we can feel it, and we are going to apply it and really present it to our customers. So this is incredible, right? For me, I just want to wrap it up saying, DataON will continue to leverage technology and share with our customer technology, right? Our goal is to work with our partner to showcase the fact that there's a lot of great feature that Microsoft offers, and each feature really depending on the customer is how it really applies to your business and how it can improve your continuity or business continuity. And we want to continue to share those knowledge with you guys, and that's why we have these webinars. Any last words, John, before we wrap this up?
Go get it. Go test it out. See what we're all excited about.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I think there are probably a few of you here already. We've been testing it. We're going to deploy it, so definitely do that. How about you, Marcelo?
I can only echo what you all said. Go get it and have fun. Enjoy the journey.
Yes. This is the journey, and Microsoft, Intel, and DataON would love to continue this journey with you and help you guys throughout the process. Thank you for attending this webinar. It's a pleasure. We'll continue to share with you, and have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you.